Welcome to Player Driven. Here's what you're about to listen to on today's episode. Today we're talking to Chip Thurston from FastSpring. We talk about the recent Apple versus Epic ruling and how it impacts the direct-to-consumer strategy for not just indie studios, but studios of all sizes. We talk about why maybe mid-core will thrive and casual might need to create a new playbook for kind of the changes that are coming up. And what is the role of a merchant of record? What does that mean? It was a really insightful conversation with Chip, and we hope you enjoy this week's episode. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Player Driven. Greg here. Today, we are joined by Chip Thurston. He is the head of gaming at FastSpring and has a really cool background as director of product at Scopely. He was at SciPlay for a while. He was at Dell for a while. And we are going to talk about all things consumer and more specifically direct consumer because there's been a lot of news on that recently. And I want to help break it down. Before we jump too much into it, Chip, thank you so much for joining me today. How is your day going?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. Day's going well. Just another day in paradise here in Austin, Texas. So beautiful weather today, nice and warm.
Yeah, you were also just at the LiveOps Summit, right? And I think that was the first year they were doing it. How was your experience at the LiveOps Summit?
Oh, it was really cool. It's like you said, the first time they've done it in Austin, and it's become. I think it'll be a nice pillar of North America gaming events and a way to congregate people in Austin. It's a nice central location, a nice senior audience. So yeah, it was great to attend.
Cool. Yeah, well, it's one of those conferences I'll need to check out for next year. I know a lot of people that went, and it seems like a really fun time. Plus, you're in Austin; it's like the best food here in the country, in the states. So that's awesome.
Yeah, no disagreement there. I can't get enough Tex-Mex.
So the big conversation of today was something that happened about 2 weeks ago, and I want to help kind of break it down. The battle of Epic versus Apple. And before we get too deep into it, let's just be aware that things are going to continue to change. Anyone that's settling, thinking, oh, it's done, it's far from done. But here is the current. As of May 1st, I believe the date was, it was that Apple can no longer restrict or block people from purchasing or using their currency outside of apps. So the ruling means Apple cannot impose any commission or fee on a purchase that consumer makes outside of an app. It says Apple cannot restrict developers' style or formatting or placement of links in an app or block the limit or use of buttons or call to action. So this was a pretty major change, but for people that are not in the industry, that just might be a bunch of jargon or gibberish, and it might be what does this mean for me? Chip, can you dumb this down for me so I have a better understanding of what does this mean for indie developers, publishers, AAAs, anyone that's creating an app? Well, what does this actually mean to me?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good breakdown of kind of more tactically what it means. When I think of the high level of what it means, I think it's helpful to start with like what we couldn't do previously to understand what we can do today. And what we couldn't do previously as game developers was uh, direct players from a mobile game into a web shop. Like we couldn't have a button inside the mobile game that says "Go to my shop," and you click there and it goes to your shop on a website, or any third-party shop, any outside payment platform. If you did that, Apple and Google had policies in place that said you would be in violation of those policies if you were to do that. And they went as far as to say you cannot even promote that. You can't have a banner in your game that says "Web shop." We have one and it exists. Like even something as general as that was against the rules. And with this ruling, now we can have those banners and those buttons. It's basically what it means. We can now steer players from our mobile game off platform to make a purchase. So we can promote that in the game, which is much more significant in terms of being able to actually grow the revenue that we're driving direct to consumer. Um, and some companies have even been exploring being able to link a direct button in the game to say, I'm just going to route the payment directly off platform. So I don't have to send my purchase through Apple, in this case, in the United States. I can just send that payment elsewhere. And so we're still waiting to see how that part plays out. But at the end of the day, it means we can steer it. But it's also important to remember this only applies to the United States and it only applies to iOS at this time.
So, just for my own kind of curiosity, The last concept you were saying, where you have the button that links to payment directly outside the platform, does that mean you won't even link to a web shop? It just means I'm making an API call to a wallet backend that will make the transaction, and I don't even need to utilize the iOS or Google. Well, it just affects Apple now, but
Yeah, I would say possibly. That's kind of that's where some of these rulings are specific, but still somewhat vague, and so we're waiting to see how that part plays out. The what it could be as simple as the backend solution that you just mentioned. It could be a web view that pops up over, so you're still inside the game instead of being redirected to a website entirely, but the purchase is facilitated that way. And that's the part where my not being a lawyer and having no legal expertise here, I struggle a bit to interpret exactly what is doable and what isn't. So I think it really depends on a studio and how aggressive they want to be, knowing that this ruling is in place.
why does a studio want to bypass the Apple ecosystem? I mean, at the end of the day, and I've always been an Android user because I enjoy the freedom, right? And although it's not as much freedom as people think, but like, why bypass the Apple ecosystem if everything's just baked in nicely?
Yeah, you do get a lot of value out of being inside the Apple ecosystem, right? Like you said, it's all very turnkey solution. There's a lot of trust that players have with that. It is an easy way to do it, but you have to pay 30% of every dollar of revenue to Apple in that case, or to Google on their platform. And when you route that to a web shop, it's much lower. It'll be somewhere under 10%. It could be 5, 6, 7%. So you're making significantly more profit when you drive that revenue through an off-platform channel as opposed to on-platform.
Is there additional data that you're able to connect when you're taking that user off platform, or do iOS still prohibit that type of data that you have the ability to access?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like iOS does have their privacy policies in place, but when you're taking players off platform, you are handling more information that way, right? And so you're able to get more information to connect with them directly, whether that's email or other information you get. And there's a lot of value in that. You're establishing a more direct relationship with that player, and that does open up a lot of flexibility in the future. So yeah, there's a lot of value in that just from a long-term player relationship management standpoint that you get from having off-platform channels too.
What's the overhead for a studio that wants to implement a tool like this? Is it become much more complex since you're not just using the baked in ecosystem again?
I would say it depends. It can be as little or as much as a studio wants it to be, right? And so that's where a merchant of record like FastSpring comes in. So the reason a company like FastSpring is valuable is because we'll be the one to come in and handle the payments. Because uh, when directing payments off platform, well, you're no longer using Google or Apple to facilitate that, so they're not handling currency conversions or taxes or any risk management. That all then falls on you. And so you can then offload that as a game developer, you can offload that to the merchant of record. And so the merchant of record comes in and says, okay, we'll handle the checkout. So FastSpring goes in, we handle your currency conversion to different areas. We handle the tax payouts to different places. We handle risk management if there's any maybe fraudulent purchases or anything with chargebacks that might come through. That's all handled directly by FastSpring. And so the that's at the checkout process, right? Offloading that part of the work. But the work the game developer would still do would be saying, okay, how do we build this shop? And that's where it depends and can kind of be something that is I think of it as a crawl, walk, run of you crawl by just, we need a shop, right? We need a page with our store items on there. And that's something players can go and purchase. And that's a pretty light touch effort. It doesn't take a lot to build that shop, but there is some effort to actually build the page and connect it to your game. But then over time, you can layer in more features and more engagement drivers and maybe other pages to your website, maybe a news page or a leaderboards page, or some other event page. And as you do those, your website can become this truly complementary experience to your mobile game. And in doing so, you grow your direct to consumer revenue. But again, that's more the run stage, right? That's more you kind of build to that over time. And so, going back to your original question, the investment can be pretty light to start and just get that foundation in place. And then you can really think about, okay, how can we grow this, and how do we maximize that over time, and how much does it make sense for us to invest in that?
I think that's such a great analogy. I'm a huge fan of when people use the terminology crawl, walk, run. When I was in my sales engineering stage, it was kind of my pitch that I would talk to every customer. Like, all right, this tool can do a lot, right? And if you try and start this tool and by doing everything all at once, you're going to fail. Like, you can't just take on every feature of this tool at first. So look at the crawl, walk, run stage. And I think you said it really well, is start by crawling, by just having a page with these things on it, the purchases on it, right? Direct the consumer away from the store or the iOS store and more to either the FastSpring or whatever you're using store. From there, you'll start to see how your ecosystem can expand, what tools you want to integrate as well to make it more seamless, more just straightforward. Maybe you want to integrate support eventually into there, maybe trust and safety, maybe just a feedback form directly in there. I think there's so much possibility, especially when you can start controlling that data and not manipulating it, but kind of creating those workflows for those users. I think it's really cool. And I think, my first thing that comes to mind is, Epic also announced that they were launching a web store, right? And I don't know what implications, that's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, English is not my first. Yeah. So it makes me think, how do you take a look at something like Epic coming into there? And is it more the merrier? Is it just introducing people to other solutions out there, or is it a risk? Or
Yeah, I think I'm not that familiar with the Epic solution yet. I'll need to read up on that. But I would say when it comes to the other players we're seeing in the space, I think it's necessary. Like, this is direct to consumer is no longer optional for games, right? Over the last several years, it's been okay. That might be nice to have. It might drive more profit for my business, but I have other priorities maybe. And we've heard that from some companies. And so some invest heavily and succeed, and others maybe are more on the fence. And now with this recent ruling, I think it's become more of a necessity, and more gaming companies are saying we need a direct to consumer platform, and therefore we need a merchant of record. And so, as more merchants enter the space, there won't be one merchant to rule them all. I feel pretty confident in saying that. And so I think it's good that we have other merchants in place too. And that also has to do with the scale, right? The scale of this business, when a company like FastSpring or Epic or any of the others are handling payments. And as those companies drive more payments through their web shop, and more companies are creating web shops, right? It's exponentially growing the volume that we're processing. And so I don't think it would be feasible for one company to be able to handle all of that. And so I think it's great that we have multiple companies out there, and also it gives companies options too, right? Like, what FastSpring does will be different from what Epic does, will be different from what another company does. So yeah, I think it's the natural evolution we're seeing of the merchant of record space.
yeah, and it builds into something just cooler. And I mean, and I'd love to touch on your time at Scopely, right? In one of my previous jobs, right? We had visibility on Scopely wanting to build out a player facing kind of storefront, right? And same with Zynga, and we see all these studios, big studios, right, starting to think, how do I create my own store, my own player profile, my own shop, right? Did this kind of first concept come to you while you were at SciPlay or Scopely? Like, how did you look at this problem before there was external places you can make these purchases and start thinking, hey, there's something here?
Yeah, for me, my journey was kind of funny, because I was at Scopely, and I joined Scopely to manage LiveOps on one of our casual games on Yahtzee with buddies, and I was managing the team of product managers around that, and really just focused on day to day events and revenue and forecasting, and everything with the day to day operations of the game. And then we had our web shop, and I wasn't involved with it when it was created, but then there was a point where it was at this inflection point, saying like, are we going to invest more in this? We weren't seeing as much success with it on Yahtzee as we were on maybe some other titles at Scopely. And so it was a big question mark. And they said, hey, Chip, can you come in and basically run this? Like, help us decide if it's worth investing in, and what the roadmap would be, and what the future potential could be. And so that was when I just went all in on the direct to consumer space, and really familiarized myself with it a few years back, and came away with the conclusion that like if we try to do on casual what we've seen succeed on midcore, well, it's not going to work. We can't just copy paste over from midcore into casual, right? There are different games, different audiences, different reasons. And happy to go more into that if it's helpful, but at the end of the day, we had to redefine the strategy. And for us in that case, it meant pivoting a lot of the decision making and like what content we were building out and how we were migrating players over to the store. And so at the end of the day, for me, it was a tremendous learning experience, but something that was really exciting and something where I personally could look at it and say, "Oh wow, like this space is just a tremendous growth opportunity for mobile games, and it seems to be the direction a lot of this industry is going." And then that's really borne out over the years since. And then as I migrated over to a mid-core title and my time at Scopely and got more involved in the web shop there, and then of course transitioned now over to FastSpring on the merchant of record side, I've seen that really play out on just the scope of direct-to-consumer adoption in gaming.
That's super cool. And I want to ask why is there a difference between mid-core and casual, right? Is it just the persona of the player? Someone maybe casual may or may not be willing to make a purchase more, may not want to bounce out of the app. Like, well, what's the reason that it's not the same?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason is the purchase uh, in motivator. So when I think about midcore, it's a very engaged audience, and purchases are somewhat premeditated. Right? If I'm playing a midcore game, I say, okay, I know this big event is coming up, or this new character is getting released, or this new feature will drop, and I have a general idea that I'll be spending money around that, and I know about how much I'll be spending, and so there's a healthy rhythm to those mid-core titles. And also on mid-core, I want to get the most out of it. Like I'm seeking that competitive advantage, and so anything I can do to get a competitive advantage in a mid-core game, I'll do. And that means if I'm spending money, I want to get the most back for wherever I'm spending that money, which means web shop, right? So, and the other benefit actually of midcore, which we should talk more about, is community. The if I'm in a guild on a midcore game and I learn, oh, I can get more by spending my money on the web shop instead of the mobile shop, well, I'm going to go make my purchases on web, but I'm also going to tell my entire guild, like, hey, everybody, go make your purchases there, so our guild can do even better instead of purchasing on mobile. And so that word of mouth can become really strong on midcore, and that's not really the case on casual. Most casual games don't have that breadth of communication inside the game, and certainly not outside of the game. And so that's just one less growth vector that you have there. But then circling back to my first point on purchase motivator, whereas it's premeditated on midcore, on casual, it's much more impulsive, right? It's more, okay, I'm playing this level and I need a little bit more currency, and I'm going to make a purchase just to try to beat this level, right? Like I failed and I can spend $2 and get more turns or whatever to try to beat this level, and that's a big purchase motivator. Or maybe I'll go into the store and make a purchase, but there's much less forethought in that. It's just kind of jump over, make the purchase, get back to playing what I'm playing. And so the friction that comes with a web shop is much more significant for the casual audience than it is for the mid-core audience. And so I think there were just significantly more obstacles. That's not to say there was a lack of opportunity on casual. Like the opportunity was still there. We just had to think about it in a very different way.
Yeah, I want to just kind of reiterate that just to make sure, because I think that was so well put, right? And I just want to make sure it all digested properly. So, casual game is more of a hey, I can't beat this level. I'm going to purchase extra gems, get extra lives, get extra power ups, and then I'm probably going to go another 20 levels and go do that same thing again. Yeah, every once in a while, the Halloween event will drop, and that's predictable by you, and you'll know, hey, there's going to be more purchases at the Halloween event, but it's still very trigger driven or event driven, whereas mid-core, it's a serious gamer, and this new monster is going to come out next week, and we know people are going to want to buy armor and the horse sword and whatever, right? I'm clearly just making crap up here, but like with that, it's a little more strategic to know that, all right, there's going to be an influx of purchases here because our mid-core players that like to play mages are going to want to make purchases here, and we're going to see an influx, and it's much more uh driven? I'm like purpose driven. Like we know this is coming and you're creating that. Does that seem like I'm following all right?
Yeah, yeah, that was a great summary, and you had me thinking. It really comes down to like almost predictability, right? Like we know how players will react to certain things much more in a mid-core game, and we can kind of forecast that out. And on casual, it may not quite be as predictable or as engineered as it is on mid-core.
I feel like I'm becoming a live ops rookie right here, amateur as we're talking. I also love the concept of community, right? Because that's huge. When I was into Clash of Clans, and this was the example you told me on our pre-call, like I agreed. Like every time someone came in and made a purchase, and you say, "Hey, everyone got 20 extra gems in the group because someone purchased this package," like yeah, no doubt I'm going to do the same thing. Like, why just purchase 20 gems for me when it could share the wealth amongst everyone? So, with that community concept, do you or have you, whether it be at FastSpring today or at Scopely? Well, let's focus on FastSpring, right? Do you encourage community? Do you have tools that incorporate community? Is a thing that you just talk to when people are talking about it?
Yeah, I think of it more as a growth vector for studios to make sure they're aware of and taking advantage of, right? And taking advantage has a negative connotation, but something that they're leveraging to say, make sure that you have the tools to, like you said, when there's a purchase made and that purchase can benefit other members in the community. Maybe that's a value you only put on your web shop instead of having it in both mobile and web. And the more you can have that exclusive value on your web shop, then the more you'll migrate revenue over there. And when you tether it to community, like in that example you just gave, you're creating a wonderful synergy of that, where you're saying like, oh, it's the exclusivity of being on web, but it's also the community-driven aspect of being on web, where this will make the broader community even more aware. So to answer your question on tools, no, we really focus on the checkout experience at FastSpring, and so we're primarily here to handle checkout and, like I said, risk management and payment, currency conversion, global enablement, and all that. But we do work with our customers to say, like, okay, let's make sure you know how to maximize your direct to consumer revenue. Like maybe what are the best practices out there, and how can you make the most of that to migrate that revenue over.
Fantastic. I want to quickly jump into my fireball round where I'm just going to throw some lollipop questions to you for some answers and we can go. Good
Let's
to go?
do
All
it.
right.
Lollipops and fireballs.
What is the last game you played?
Ooh, the last game. I have a 7-year-old kiddo here, so we've been playing a lot on the Switch, and we're in our Mario phase right now. So Super Mario Odyssey has been a big game lately.
Wonderful. You should check out Kirby. My 6-year-old loves Kirby if you haven't checked
Ooh,
that out yet.
nice.
What was the last song you listened to?
Oh wow.
The CD
Uh,
player. Is that a CD player behind you?
oh no.
Oh, I was going to
Yeah, I
say, it looks
forgot to
like an
clean that up.
antique.
It's like an old boom box we got back there. I
I
don't know
love
why
it.
it's there. I'll need to ask my wife about that. The last song I listened to, man, it was probably again. I'm going into total dad mode here. Some Disney hits,
Nice.
probably some Moana songs from the Moana 2, as we on that Disney radio on our way to school. So
Can I get a Chihu stuck in my mind way too often. It's not even a great song, but it's great.
no, that's the thing. Some of these songs are not good. Like Moana 1 had clearly a better soundtrack.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe these are some hot takes here, but
that isn't the least hot take at all. It is the better
yeah,
soundtrack, the first one, but there's some
good.
bangers on number two.
They're still very catchy.
Number three is what is your dream vacation?
Ooh, uh, I would love to go to, I think, Tokyo. Never been. And I'm even considering going later this year, maybe for Tokyo Game Show or something like
Nice.
that. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, anywhere I haven't been, I just love the variety of going and seeing different places.
If I'm coming to Austin for the first time and I need to find a restaurant to eat at, where should I be going?
All right, I'm gonna go a little off the beaten path here. I think most people will say barbecue, right? Definitely, you should get barbecue. Like, don't ignore the barbecue. And there's Franklin's barbecue. There's Terry Black's barbecue. Both great. I'm going to recommend Quantos Tacos. It's a it's a truck, like it's in this little food truck court. It's very nondescript, but best tacos in Austin, in my opinion. And it's one of those very authentic places for its that true cuisine. And I think they have 6 different tacos. And what you can do when you go up there is you say, I want one of each. And they give you this little platter of these 6 tacos. And they're small, so it's not like tremendous indulgence or anything. And I honestly don't know what the 6 different meats I'm eating are. And I don't want to think too much about it, but they are just delicious and incredible. So that would be my recommendation.
I'll have that with like a beer flight of different beers. I feel like that is a good last meal.
There you go. The taco flight, we'll call it.
There you go. All right, you're off the hot seat. Easy peasy.
Whew.
Yeah, right? We could all breathe easy now. What I'm curious, and we kind of already talked about this, but let's go down is one of the beauty of using iOS or Google is that you don't have to worry about compliance when it comes to different areas of the world when it comes to payments, right? And now, is this something that someone's gonna have to worry about, or when you're with a company like FastSpring or whoever you use, like is that typically covered?
Sorry, can you clarify a little bit about what you mean by the compliance
I
side of it?
guess I'm thinking compliance, but it's also like taxes in the different areas that you're in, and the different forms of payment you can use in localization. I guess compliance just the laws of where you are and what you are allowed to purchase.
So yeah, in our case, the payments compliance is tax compliance is a major part of what FastSpring does. I would say what any merchant of record does. That's actually a good point to call out. Is one pitfall I've seen for game developers is misunderstanding the difference between a payment service provider or a PSP and a merchant of record. So a PSP could be like Stripe or Square, PayPal, and those definitely have a great function in terms of enabling payment methods. But if I were to bring in a PSP, I'm still the merchant, meaning I'm still accountable for taxes on a global scale. I'm still accountable for the risk management on a global scale. When I bring in a merchant of record, they're the ones actually handling the processing and the transaction and the revenue, and therefore they're the ones handling taxes and compliance on a global scale. So, for example, if I want to sell in Brazil and I'm based in North America, um, I need a physical business entity in Brazil to be able to transact in that country, right? So I need to have some physical presence in that country. And then I need to understand the tax rules. Like what is the tax policy in Brazil? And then if there's an audit coming from Brazil, I need to have my tax records ready to be able to handle that audit. When I have a merchant of record like FastSpring, we say we'll set you live in Brazil. Like we'll handle that. If audits come up, we'll handle it. Any risk management, any presence there, like that's all done by FastSpring. And so it tremendously reduces the complexity and brings in a true partner to handle all of that for you.
So, in a different term, a merchant of record is kind of like an all-in-one solution. They'll do it all for you. You're paying a premium most likely because they're handling a lot of this dirty work that you'll have to do if you don't think about it. If you're with a, a payment processor.
Yeah. I would call it the clean work, but yeah, it's no. I think there's a key part you touched on there, which is the premium, right? Like a payment service provider will have a lower rate, like a lower fee than a merchant of record will, and that can be like very appealing on surface value of like, oh wow, okay, well I will use that lower rate, not realizing that you're getting a lot less in return and you're introducing a lot more risk into your business as a result. And so, yeah, I think having that understanding is pretty important, especially as companies are getting more involved in direct to consumer revenue.
When you were at Scopely, and now while you're at FastSpring, right? You at Scopely, blah, 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 blah. You inherited the platform, right? And you made improvements to that, and then you came to FastSpring, and I imagine FastSpring was already operating, maybe not in gaming yet, but they already had a platform. But what what solutions did FastSpring offer that would have saved you time at Scopely, or what is missing that you used at Scopely that you're like, this would be really cool if we could integrate something like this into the platform?
Yeah, I think I'll think of that in a slightly different way of like, what would I do today to equip myself for the future? Because I don't when I think about the current ruling, and how that benefits game publishers. The companies that are able to benefit the most from this ruling are the ones who already have a direct to consumer strategy in place. Right? They already have a web shop, or they already have a merchant of record in place, and they can act quickly to act on this new ruling and what these new norms are. And so, what I would say is there's this potential for different ways this could go in the future. We don't know how Apple will respond to this new ruling yet. They've already appealed the ruling and motioned for a stay on the ruling, so things could change pretty quickly here. And so I think it's a very fluid situation. And so what I would look to do is establish the framework to be able to react to that fluidity. And that means like have that basic web shop in place, have that merchant of record in place, have that ability to ramp up or ramp down as needed. And so if things become more open in the future in terms of how I can promote and steer players from my game to my web shop, I'm able to accommodate that. If it's on a geographic scale, I have the ability to do that differently geographically. For example, if this current ruling is in the United States, if there's a new ruling that's only in Europe or in Japan, as we've heard, there's some momentum there. We're ready, and then if those rulings do materialize, we're able to say, all right, we have the tools in place to accelerate from day one instead of scrambling to try to react, right? And so it's more investing, I think, in the knowledge of the current landscape and then what tools we can develop such that we can really capitalize on any rulings that come up.
Yeah, you're almost investing in a best practice, right? Because things again will change. That was the first thing we said. Things will change again, right? And if you're with a platform, right, the platform can adjust as a whole, right? Instead of you having to change everything every 3 months, you can just go with this platform, and the platform will evolve with whatever the rulings are. And to your point, it might be different in Europe versus America versus Asia versus Africa, right? So how do you globally scale for something like that, especially if you're on a smaller team, right? You don't want someone to have to go learn all the laws of what's going on somewhere else, right? Why not just follow a leader in the space?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key part there too is like what happens in Europe, like is going to look different than what the current rulings are in the United States. And so I feel pretty optimistic that it will be more open at some point in the future in terms of how we can promote web shops and market web shops and direct to consumer strategy in Europe at some point. But I don't know exactly what that will look like. And so that's where I think having that nuanced understanding of like, okay, what exactly is doable? Like, what exactly does this new ruling mean? And how can we act on that? And how is our strategy going to be different now in Europe versus in this hypothetical situation versus what it was in the United States versus what it could be in Japan or Brazil or these other places? And so I think it could get pretty complicated in the near future as we have these different rulings roll out kind of piecemeal on a geographic basis.
This is a silly question, but when you had the web store at Scopely, what were you doing if it wasn't? I'm not going to say authorized, right? But if it wasn't in Apple's terms of services.
Yeah, the great thing about Scopely was that we were able to invest in a way that was never against Apple and Google's policies. It was always in partnership, right? And recognizing that the relationship with them is very important. And this is something I tell to all of our customers too: is like it's never about going to war with Apple and Google. Like I don't want to go to war with Apple and Google. I think Epic Games on their crusade has been, but that not every company is Epic Games, right? So no, it's about understanding the policies that are in place and being respectful of them and saying like, okay, Apple and Google have established what have come to be known as these anti-steering policies. Let's make sure we understand them and operate with those. And so, for example, the rule is you can't go from mobile game directly into web shop. That's pretty clear from these anti-steering policies. But what if we create a truly complementary experience to our mobile game on our website? And we have a news page there where a new feature launches in our game. And we have a couple bullets in the game. We say, hey, if you want to learn more, like click here. And it's a button that takes them to the news page. And there's nowhere to monetize on this page, right? It's just the news and a full update, like paragraphs of content about this new feature or this new character in the game. But now they're on our website. And now that they're on our website, we can try to navigate them from that news page into the store and get revenue that way. But it's a very genuine, like, let's direct them from the mobile game into this website, whether it's news or like some tips and tricks page, or maybe it's a support page. Like, there's all sorts of different um, complementary pieces of content that we could add on a website, and then we're migrating players over time just by virtue of having that content there.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, you're building a web page that complements the app where players are going to want to go to figure out the news. They're going to want to learn more. We always talked about this in my old company. It was like, how do you get people to from console games to console support? And no one ever does that. They want to go to Reddit. They want to go to Twitter. They want to go to whatever to figure out support. And it's just like, why don't they want to go to? Well, I know the answer. No one wants to go to the publisher or the studio for support when there's more people somewhere else. But if you create an engaging site where it's almost, I mean, it goes back to the community that you mentioned, right? You're creating a community hub where people could come and learn more information, right? You're basically feeding the ecosystem with more news and more content. And I love how you kind of position that self and say, hey, we're just going to offer best services, best practices, best stuff like that, updates, and then they're there. Once they're there, right, you can kind of play with the workflows on how do we get them to go there? How do we get them to go there, right? And you can kind of build that into it. And I think that's genius in the way to look at it, right? Because you get to educate these users, you get them to learn more, you keep them updated, and they want to come back and keep doing it more and more.
Yeah. The revenue almost becomes a byproduct of that point, as you're expanding your engagement with this player and giving them more places to engage with your game outside of the game itself. And there's a lot of value in that just inherently, even if the direct to consumer revenue side of it is almost secondary at that point.
Yeah, it can't be stated enough that engagement leads to revenue. You can't force revenue out of people when there's no engagement. They're just not going to want to pay, right? But once they're excited, they're happy to be there. They'll happily put a couple dollars here or there, or depending on who you are, when they're playing those games. And I'm curious if when you're at FastSpring, are you looking at console games as well and other platforms? Or are you strictly focused on the mobile experience right now?
I would say mobile and PC primarily right
Mm-hmm.
now. So we do have a few premium PC games in our portfolio, and we explore that. The consoles are a bit more challenging in terms of driving off-platform revenue. That's another, I think, area that could evolve at some point in the future. But as of now, that's not as commonplace. And so, yeah, I think mobile certainly is where we're seeing a lot of movement, and a little bit more on the PC side. And the part I would also add is it's outside of gaming. Like, if we look at just mobile apps in general, there's a lot of movement toward direct to consumer. In fact, the first app that I saw, not a FastSpring customer to be clear, but I saw Spotify put out their update. Basically, the essentially the day after this ruling materialized of we can route payments off platform in the United States, at Spotify was like, cool, we're ready to go. And they launched their update and started routing things off platform. So I do think we'll see more and more adoption. And so as you engage in more apps yourself on mobile, you might notice more of those payments going off platform. And I think that will just be the standard moving forward.
If I'm a studio that's looking to launch a game in the next 6 months, when's the right time to start thinking about web shops?
Yeah, I think at this point it's from day one, and that's not to say you need to have a web shop from day one. Like, it doesn't need to be live day one when your game is live. That's certainly great if you can do that, but I think we've reached a point where direct to consumer, like I said earlier, it's not optional anymore. This Apple ruling proves that we as game developers need to be ready to react. Otherwise, we're putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. We're making ourselves less profitable by not having this shop that we can direct direct traffic and revenue through. And so, just being aware of that, and that can mean anything from how your store is set up and how you're accommodating multiple purchase points, to actually having that store exist on web, maybe from day one, and you say, like, we'll worry about the promotion later. Like, there's multiple ways you could go about it, but I think it is critical at this point, just with all the momentum and all the rulings moving in this direction, to have that in mind.
Yeah, so from the start scoping out what a web store could look like, how it would look. What are the size studios that should be considering stuff like this?
I think it's At this point, um, any size, like I, I guess that's the easy answer. The real thought is like, of course, you need to be successful, right? Like priority one is have a successful game and drive that revenue, um, just overall, right? And so that should absolutely be the primary focus, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. Um, but as your game materializes, even if you're a smaller game, if you can shift your profit margin from 70%, where all of your revenue is coming through Apple or Google, to 80% plus, okay, well, that's really significant. And that can be especially impactful if you are that smaller studio, right? That every dollar of profit is really critical. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that like the way merchant of record is set up is that we make revenue when our customers make revenue, right? Like it's a revenue share model. And so it really is just a shift in player behavior and a shift in profit. And yes, there is some investment in the web shop and being able to build that. But the model is built in a way that it will be able to scale as your game scales and really help you grow through being more profitable.
So I'm going to ask this question. It may be just a amalgamation of everything I've asked already, right? Chip, if you were going to start your own studio and with the experience you've learned at Scopely and what you've learned at FastSpring, what would you prioritize from a web shop perspective when you're first setting things up?
I would think of it through future proofing for direct to consumer growth, right? And so what that would look like for me is a few basic things. Like one, have a web shop as soon as we could. Two, have regional detection. Like that's something is pretty common for bigger games, but like if I'm building a game from day one, I would make sure I have the ability to say, okay, we'll treat these players differently in the United States versus these players in Europe versus these players in Japan, and how we promote the web shop could be different in all three regions. Um, and so just having that degree of control would be really important to recognize like these roles vary geographically. Um, and I think I would also and be like, I want to make sure we have a trusted source to help us stay on top of these regulations. Like, well, who's that person who can help us know what these rulings mean and when they go into effect, and if it means I should act today or if I should keep my guard up and see. Um, I think it can get kind of tricky to know when to act versus when it would be overreacting to just go full speed ahead. And so that's I think a possible pitfall too that I would be really cognizant of.
Cool. There's been a lot of information here, Chip, and I appreciate it. I think it's going to be an interesting few months here with how Apple's going to react. They will react, but I think no matter how they react, it's looking positive for studios to be able to control their purchase data or purchases, who where they can purchase. And I think it's an exciting space to be in. Before we do end today's conversation, is there anything else you want to talk about or mention?
I think we touched on most everything. The part I would add is one theme we talked about today is the uncertainty of the current moment. And like we don't know how Apple's going to react, and we don't know maybe when other regions will have similar rulings materialize. And so for me, that uncertainty means there's urgency, right? Like the current moment is this unprecedented opportunity to steer players from mobile games into web shops, but we don't know how long this current moment will last. It could last indefinitely. This could just be the new normal, or this could end pretty shortly if some other ruling materializes in the United States. And so that's where I would say like it's important to have a caution and do due diligence, absolutely, but it's also important to recognize that like sometimes these windows are opening and closing pretty quickly, and so I think finding that balance is pretty critical of knowing when to act and when to act with urgency.
Again, before we do end tonight, let us know where we can find more information about either yourself, Chip, or FastSpring.
Yeah, you can find us at fastspring.gg. We have all of our gaming offerings there, so please do reach out if you want to learn more about FastSpring. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn, probably the best place to find me.
Cool. We'll have information about Chip. We'll have information about FastSpring on our player-driven blog, and you'll see about it all week on social. So, Chip, thank you so much for joining us today and educating us on what actually this means between Apple and Epic, and how studios could take advantage of this. I think it's really important information that people need to be able to wrap their heads around, because it's a lot of money that can be left on the table if you're not utilizing stuff like this. So thank you for breaking this down for us, educating us, and joining us today.
Yeah, well said. And thank you, Greg. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.